I invite your attention to Acts chapter 3, verse 14. Coming with a lot of mixed emotions. I've been saturating in the crucifixion event this week more forcibly than maybe other weeks, but folks, oh, how I need a Redeemer. How desperate I am for a Redeemer. I didn't realize that I'm a middle class, upper middle class Jew, educated Pharisee, never been drunk, never took drugs, never cheated on my wife, kept the laws, operated in the temple, promoted religion, served God. I didn't know how desperate I was for a Redeemer. What is until that guy by the name of Peter? There was that lame man fella. We knew him. He was at the gate, beautiful. Years, we knew his condition. We gave him money, man. We supported the family. Come on. It was a part of our religion. But evidently, Peter had confronted him with this person of Jesus, and a miracle had taken place in this guy's life, and he was holding on to Peter with everything he had. And they were down at the temple in the porch, Solomon's porch. And this large crowd all gathered in. I was a part of them, man. We all gathered in and stared at this guy, and Peter began to, he wasn't preaching exactly, it was an exhortation. He was brutal to us. I mean, he didn't pat us on the back. Everybody else had patted us on the back and said, "Oh, you're a nice guy. Put an extra 10 in the offering." You know, everybody else had done that kind of stuff, but not Peter. He was absolutely blunt with us. He looked us right in the eye and told us exactly what we had done to Jesus. He didn't blink an eye. He didn't smooth talk it. He didn't cover it over. He just right straight between the eyes. He told me exactly what my guilt was, and he gave me the truth. And when the Holy Spirit got done moving in that scene, I'm worse than the drunkard. I'm worse than the, I'm worse than the alcoholic. I'm worse than the adulterer. I'm worse because, man, I knew. I participated at the heart of the whole prophecy thing, and I should have known better. But see, it wasn't until I saw all that I had done against the backdrop of who Jesus was. In fact, he addressed us, you'll remember, in verse 12, as men of Israel, which tied us all back into an Old Testament and the whole flow of what God was doing and what he had promised in terms of the Messiah. And come on, we're the guys that got up every morning, and the first word spoken in our household, before the kids said anything, wife said anything, before any greetings were given, before anybody asked what was for breakfast, man, we all looked at each other and said, could this be the day? See, we were all looking for the coming Messiah. We were looking for we're the guys that believed this. We're the ones that had the prophecies from the old all the way through, man. They hammered us with these prophecies. We quote them at church every Sunday. We told it every day when we looked at each other. We were consistently talking about this coming Messiah. And especially since Rome had so overthrown us and gotten into us and was dominating us. And man, we were sick of all of this. We wanted to be the nation we had been. We were crying out to God on a daily basis for a Messiah to come. And why didn't I see it? And what really finally got me was when Peter began to talk about Jesus in terms of verse 13, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our fathers, glorified his servant Jesus. And I began to see myself stacked up against his servant Jesus. That's what got me. Extremities. Whew. Do you realize Jesus went to the wall? Jesus went to the limits. Do you realize nobody could look at Jesus and say, mediocre. Nobody could look at him and say, well, it was a mild redemption. It was a smoothing. He was slick, wasn't he? See, nobody looked at him like that because Jesus pushed the limits, man. He went to the extremes. He went to the wall. He went further. He went to where there was nobody else beyond. Wherever you trace it out, if you can do such a thing, to the worst of the worst, that's where he was. See, Jesus went to the extremes. I tried to make a list of this. This is not an exhaustive list, probably foolish to do this kind of thing, but I just couldn't get away from it. A list of the extremes. Jesus went to the extremes. You can add to this, but just walk through this with me. Do you realize Jesus was not born in comfort? He was born in a stable. Do you realize he was not born of acceptable parents? He was an illegitimate kid. And when he's 30 years of age, preaching in Nazareth, his own hometown, they said that to him. Threw it in his face. Do you realize Jesus wasn't born of wealthy parents? It was a peasant couple with no political connections and no strings. They were nothing. Do you realize that Jesus was raised in the worst town, not the best Jewish environment, the worst town in Palestine, where all the riffraff, ruffians, paganism of the world just walk through their place? Do you realize? Do you realize he wasn't born just as a man, but a homeless man? Foxes have holes. The birds of the air have nests. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Do you realize he was not a handsome among men? Do you realize he had no form or comeliness? And when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. There was nothing about him that said, oh, I'm attracted. Have you grasped the fact that his ministry was not to respectable Jews like me, but to those who bore the physical evidence of sin? Listen to a description of his crowd. They brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics and paralytics. That was his crowd. Do you realize he didn't just experience persecution, but he was treated as a criminal, that he didn't just die, that he experienced the death of a cross, that he did not experience this privately, but he was exposed naked in public shame? Do you realize he didn't just take on the sins of a few people, but the sins of all generations? He did not just embrace the idea of sin, but he experienced all of your sin as if he had done them himself. He didn't just pay a token penalty for sin, but he actually went to the worst hell. Do you know why he did that? So that there would not be one single one of you that would ever be able to come to him and say, well, you haven't been where I've been. He covered all the bases, went to the wall, the extremes. The extremes. And do you realize he was called in the midst of all of that by Peter in verse 14, the Holy One. The Holy One. The Holy One. Holy One is the fact that God is only holy, and Jesus experienced the very nature of God within himself. This was the perfect love idea that there was roaring through his being, in the very essence of his motive, in the driving passion of his nature. There was this perfect love. It absolutely could not, impossible to do, filled with, flowed in this absolute love stuff. And he was just, because you see, his actions always lined up with his nature, and his nature drove his action until every movement of his being, every miracle he did, never had an angle. It was never a self thing. It was never do something for me. It was always do something for you, because he was driven, his actions lined up with the very nature of his very being. And ladies and gentlemen, when I take my life, who I am, and I stack it up against that, man, there's something in me that just crawls. There's something in me that just dies. There's something in me that wants to shrink away. There's something in me that says, oh. And I get on my face and cry out, do you understand? I am the worst person who's ever lived. Because Peter describes me perfectly. You know how he describes me? Listen to this. Verse 14. You denied the Holy One and the just. You ask for a murderer to be granted to you. I didn't realize how bad I was until this verse came alive. Let me walk you through it. Number one, protested. It's in the denied thing. But you denied. You denied. There are two main verbs in the verse. Denied and ask. Denied, one of the main verbs. It's an interesting word. It's arkneromai, which is the Greek word. And it's in the middle voice, which makes it all the worse, because it's the idea of middle voice is, there's the active, you understand, and the passive, but this is the middle voice, which means I'm responsible for doing this, but it's much more than that. The responsibility for doing this lies in the fact that, this is what I preferred. See, middle voice is your personal preference. This is what I really wanted. See, I wasn't forced to do this. This wasn't, well, you'll kill my kids if I don't kind of stuff. This isn't, I was backed into a wall to do this. This was, out of all the choices I had, this is the one I want. Out of all the things I could have done and all the ways I could have reacted, this was the top of my priority. If I could do this one, whoa. See, this was the kind of choice that when we got done, we whacked each other on the back and said, whoa, good job. Well, we pulled it off, didn't we? Hey, that's how we walked out of that scene. We were in the presence of Pilate, and there was the Barabbas guy, and then there was all of this going on, and all the trial stuff, and when it was all over, we wiped our hands and whacked each other on the back. We went home, and wow, we celebrated. Had a Diet 7-Up and celebrated, brother. We said, woo, we got her done, didn't we? Hey, we pulled it off. See, this was our top priority. This was right out of our personal preference. This is what I preferred, Barabbas over against Jesus, the Holy One. Come on, I did that. I did that. That was me. In fact, it's interesting that this word, arkneromai, it's used 32 times in the Scriptures, in the New Testament. Paul never uses the term, which means it's pretty well isolated to the Gospels, and it's pretty well isolated to how you treat Jesus. It's used some other times, but pretty well isolated in the 32 times about how you treat Jesus and how you feel about him and what's going on in your life in relationship to him. So that this word is really a strong word. It's attached to the idea of the attitude of refusal. See, I refuse you, you Holy One. I refuse you, you miracle worker. I refuse you, the one who displays the very heart and nature and love of God. I refuse you. And oh, this is my delight. This is my choice. Oh, if I could just have Barabbas. See, that's the impact of the word. It's the word that's used, and this is another whole aspect of the word. It's the idea of the two. There's two aspects actually for its usage. One is the idea of a statement of attitude to claim or demand. It has to do with there is a claim or a demand, and it has to do with your attitude towards that claim. In other words, we were presented with the overwhelming proposition of the Barabbas or Jesus situation of what we were going to choose, and we refused. So it's back to that refusal idea, which is the attitude. The second idea of this word is really significant. It's contesting something that is already in existence. In other words, it has to be true or you haven't denied it. Now, there's another word for denying when something isn't true, but that's not this word. My favorite illustration of that is if your wife was standing up here and I said, well, I'm not married to her, I would be denying marriage to her, which would be true. That's not this word. This word has to do with my wife was standing up here. And I said, oh, well, I'm not married to her. That's this word. It's the Peter thing, you remember? Yeah, 3 times he denied. A lady, a man, and another lady. He denied, cussed the name of Jesus. Oh, you know this story. Jesus said he'd do it 3 times before the rooster crowed. And he denied those 3 times. Something that was true. He did know him. I don't. Yes, you do, Peter. He denied something that was in reality. That's what's going on in this passage. It's a denial of a reality, something that I know that is real. Here's the Holy One and the just. Hey, I knew that. Didn't he walk our streets? Didn't I see his miracles? Didn't I see all that was taking place? Didn't I see him spilling himself out? Didn't I see that he never, ever, ever manipulated? He didn't have any politics in him, man. He didn't pull any strings. He didn't feather his own nest. He never did that. We watched him for 3 years. Listen, we had eyes on him all the time. Come on. We knew exactly what kind of a guy he was. He was the Holy One and the just. He proved that again and again and again and again. And in the middle of knowing that, we denied him. When we knew it was the truth. Do I need a redeemer? Oh, dear Jesus, do I need a redeemer? Do I need a redeemer? Because, friend, I haven't just made bad choices. I'm a nice guy. I just made bad choices. No, that isn't what's happened to me. I've got a core of evil in my system that has driven me and dominated me and would rather have a Barabbas, a murderer, than would have a holy Jesus to hang around and press my life. And I participated, voluntarily wiped my hands, drank a Diet 7-Up, and celebrated while I nailed him. I'm talking about this boy, that the prevenient grace of God surrounded me. His love came after me. He saved me from... He healed my body when I don't even know it. I should have been dead 20 times as a teenager, and he rescued me every single time. Come on, he has showered me, he has moved me, he has surrounded me, he has protected me, he has loved me, he has literally shaken me, he has brought me under the sound of the gospel, he has brought me into grace, he has literally bombarded me day after day after day. Do you know what kind of a saint I should be if I had responded to all of that? But I didn't. You know what I did? Nail him. Nail him. Do I need a redeemer? Now, as bad as that seemed to me, this verse got progressively worse. I don't know what to do with this. It's in the second word, second verb. It's the word ask. It's prayed, protested and prayed. And you say, well, where'd the prayed thing come from? Well, see this word. Look at this thing in verse 14. But you denied the Holy One and the just, and you ask for a murderer. You ask. It's interesting. The Greek word for ask there is itelo. It's a word that is used consistently for the idea of prayer. It's never translated prayer. Want to be honest with you. Can't find one single place in the New Testament where this word is ever translated prayer. But it's always used, it's not always, but it's normally used within the context of somebody asking, begging, desiring, longing for something from a superior being like God. So it's used in connection of somebody asking God for something, which is the prayer concept. And in the context of our passage, do you know what's going on there? We were asking for a murderer, the Barabbas thing. See, he's a murderer. He'll slit your throat. He steals from you. He molests your women. He's nasty. He's mean. He has all the qualities that you don't want him babysitting your kids. He's the opposite of everything you think of decency and rightness. He's a horrible individual. And you know what we did? We prayed to God for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be gone. It was a prayer, man. I don't know what you think about prayer. See, I was raised to think that prayer was something you did at a specific time when you got on your knees. It was usually more effective if you were at an altar. If the altar was cushioned, that was really effective. It was the kind of thing that if you really wanted to be effective in your prayer, you got a metal chair, got up at 3 a.m., went into the kitchen where it would echo, and you beat the chair and yelled at the top of your lungs at the same time, crying out to God so all the family would know. We called that prayer. But as I've been getting into the new covenant, a whole new concept of prayer. In fact, this happened to me back in teenage days, and that's been gnawing at me and working on me ever since. How long ago was that? 95 years. So this thing has been gnawing on me about prayer. I got into this idea of practicing His presence. That if Christianity is what the Bible says it, if this new covenant is really the possibility that we have for this hour, you know what that means? That means that living in my flesh right now is the person of Jesus. That God is not off someplace. That God is not a long ways away. He's not the big man upstairs. That's not what's going on here. That the very essence of what Christianity is, that God has joined Himself in me. He's actually crawled through the pores of my skin and gotten inside my body. And He's literally penetrated my mind. And when I think a thought, He thinks it. What is prayer? Communication. So the whole prayer idea is the thinking of the mind, the thought process, Do you know what we're doing right now? Don't you think He's hearing your thoughts? I wish that preacher had shut up. Don't you think He heard that? Don't you think He just heard that? You just prayed to God. It's interesting, in the Old Testament, there's indication that as the Israelites were in the wilderness griping to God, griping about the food and the water, that their gripes went up to God as a prayer. Oh my. If that's true, do you realize what you've prayed for? if every thought of your mind is a prayer? I need God to redeem my prayer life. Jesus was standing there, the Holy One and the just, and lo and behold, you know what I did? I prayed out to God for Barabbas to be released. I wanted a murderer. I prayed for hate. I prayed for destruction. I prayed for lowness. I prayed for evil. I said, God, we don't want your plan. God, give us our plan. And he did. He did give me my plan. Life fell apart. And then I blamed him. I blamed him. Said, well, you don't love me. Look what you did to me. When I begged him and pleaded with him to give me Barabbas. It was a prayer. I prayed for him to reverse his plan and let me have mine. And then when it didn't work out, I criticized him. You don't suppose today what I need to do is get flat on my face and say, oh God, I never want to utter a prayer that isn't in your divine will. I never want to think a thought influence you. Allow one petition to escape my lips that isn't your mind. It gets worse. Look at verse 14. You denied the Holy One and the just. You asked for a murderer to be granted to you. To be granted to you. I couldn't believe it. The Greek word for to be granted is harisomai. Harisomai. The root word of that is grace. In other words, give us a favor. Have mercy on us. Have grace upon us. Spill grace upon us. See, we asked for Barabbas, prayed for Barabbas, and in that prayer, we framed it in, oh, God of grace and mercy. Have mercy and grace on us. And we based our petition for the release of Barabbas on God's kindness. Isn't that the weirdest thing you ever heard of? Let me quote to you Colossians 2:13, which uses this same word. And you, being dead in your trespasses and uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven. There's the word. Harizomai. Having forgiven you all trespasses. See, this is the word that's all wrapped up in the idea of grace, to show favor and kindness, to pardon, to forgive. And so while we were crying out to God in prayer for Barabbas to be released, we were basing it on the issue, on the basis of God's kindness and grace. What should we have done? For hundreds of years, we had longed for God to fulfill his promise of grace and give us the Messiah. And when he did, we refused it and embraced our own filth. Come on, folks. You've got to embrace that. God poured His grace out upon you. God gave you overwhelming time after time after time after time, chance after chance after chance, love after love after love, poured out upon you again and again and again and again. And how did we respond? He poured out His life for us, and we live for ourselves. We ask Him to favor us, and He does. And we live in our hate. Trying to filter through this in my life. He gives us Jesus, and we want Barabbas. He gives us love, and we want hate. He gives us unity, and we want division. He showers us with mercy, and we want law. He gives us grace, and we prefer judgment. He gives us a helpmate, and we want lust. He gives us freedom, and we reject it and choose bondage. He gives us food, and we choose debauchery. He gives us destiny, and we live in meaninglessness. He makes us sons, and we'd rather be slaves to ourselves. He gives us eternal values, and we die for temporal stuff that is rust and junk. Gives us Jesus. And we want Barabbas. Do you feel as bad as I do? I am so sorry, Jesus. I am so sorry. Okay, so I haven't cheated on my wife. Okay, so I'm a upper middle class Jew who's been down at the temple all of his life. But in this scene, it wasn't just about deeds of my life. It's about the attitude I've lived out of myself. I've conned, politicked, pulled strings, felt more comfortable with Barabbas than Jesus. I've let the world, with its Barabbas ways, infiltrate my life day after day after day and shoved you to the back. I filled my mind with the prayers of hate, self-desires, revenge, hurts. And pushed you off on Mount Sinai. I filled my life with the pride of self-love and rejected Jesus. Forgive me, Jesus. Forgive me, Jesus. I need a Redeemer. I need you. And I'm crying out today, oh God, with the confidence that you are still loving, you are still kind, you are still a God of grace, and that somehow all of this was in your plan and that your death really can do something in me. And today, in the name of Jesus, I want to reverse my choice. I want you. And Lord, let me be the Barabbas that goes to the cross. Because no doubt somebody's got to die today. Either we will nail you and release Barabbas, or Barabbas will hang and you will live in us. So I give you myself today. Hear my petition, O God. Hear the cry of my heart. I'm not asking for just a free ticket to the sky. I'm not even asking just for nice forgiveness for my sins. I'm not crying out today, oh God. I'm not crying out for just some kind of an emotional twitch. I'm on my face before you, oh God. I'm crying out to you in this hour that you would change me at the very core of my being, that you would invade my flesh so that every prayer of my mind, every thought of my being would be in your will, that I would flow and operate under the sourcing of your Spirit, that you would literally move me to the tune of your music, that I would literally operate according to the divine resource. Change me, O God, until you are my personal preference. You're what I want. You are my cry. Heads are bowed. Moments of response. Hey, do what you want to on this? The middle voice, that's where you are. Personal preference. What do you really want? What's really the desire of your heart? What are you going to go home today clapping your hands, whacking each other on the back, saying we got what we wanted? In that service this morning, I got what I wanted. My personal preference, the real desire of my heart was answered. The Holy One is here. The Just One. Don't be satisfied with the mild. He's gone to the wall for you. He's gone to the extreme. He's hit the limits. Every base is covered. You can be what you ought to be. You can live in the unfathomable grace of God. You can walk in His presence. You can live in His intimacy. What's your choice? Can I hear your voice? Moments of seeking.